So we're going to talk about sheep tonight. If you guys are lucky enough to come back in a couple weeks, I am also going to do the one about goats, but tonight we've got sheep. So like I said, again, please ask questions. If you guys have any questions, ask away. You're going to see my kid in a lot of these. So if you see a random little boy in them, that is Ryder. So I guess first things first, I guess before we take an animal anywhere, the first thing we have to do is make sure we're registered, right? So we have to be a registered member of 4-H, or we have to be a registered FFA member with your local FFA chapters. So if you guys don't know how to register, or you aren't sure you're registered, you can call Natasha or Cheyenne at the 4-H office, and they can help you, or you can ask your 4-H leaders or your parents and they can help you. So make sure you're registered, because we can't do anything unless we are registered. So the next second most important thing I think that we all take for granted is to understand the rules. We never want to get kicked out of a show or not be prepared for a show because we broke a rule. And so you guys can't read these because it's little tiny, but we can put a link in the chat, or we can send an email, or I'm sure you guys have access to these. You can look it up on the Utah Junior Livestock Association. But these are the show rules for the Utah Junior Livestock Association shows. So the state shows, which the Uinta show is one of those shows. So make sure you guys read the rules. And I know they're not very fun to read and they take a long time sometimes, but it's super important so that you know what you're getting into, and you know that you're not breaking any rules before you even start. The next thing, I guess, is to just take the plunge, right? So we've decided we're going to show an animal. What is involved in doing that? So we're going to go start from the very beginning, and we are going to go through everything I think that there is to know or to think about when we decide to show an animal. So some of the things I have highlighted here, just thinking about developing a budget. What is the price of an animal? How much does it cost to house the animal? How much is feed? What supplies do we need, and how much are those? And then to plan for any extra costs like veterinary care or emergencies or transportation, things like that. So first things first is a budget. I don't think that a lot of the time we think about what our project is going to cost. We think, let's get a sheep or a goat or a calf or a pig and show it at the fair. So I think it's important before we start to think about what it's going to cost us and make sure that we understand that commitment. So creating a budget, or even just talking to your parents or your leader or your extension agent about a budget is an important thing to do. So how much is that animal going to cost? So to be able to buy an animal, you can think anywhere from, I've seen them for $250 all the way up to $25,000, so, or more. So your budget is super important, because that's a huge difference, right? The price of your animal depends on where you get it, the breeder and what kind of animals they breed for, or what kind of shows they breed for. Some breeders breed for fairs, and some breeders breed to try to win national shows, the biggest and the highest competition level you can get to. So there's usually a price difference in those kinds of animals. So finding a local breeder. There are breeders all over Utah and Idaho and Wyoming and all across the nation, really. So asking your friend or your leader or somebody you know that's shown an animal at some point, where they got their animal, and seeing if you can get contact information to where you buy an animal. So that's important. And then if you buy one locally, then it doesn't cost a lot to have it shipped to you. If you buy one far away, what does it cost to get that animal to you? So figure out where you're going to get your animal. And then we have to think about, what do we do when we bring it home? So once we get our animal and we bring it home, where are we going to put it? There are all different kinds of housing situations that we can use. But the most important things to remember is we have to protect them from the wind, from the rain, and from the sun. So animals get stressed really easy, especially sheep. They're a scared flight type of animal. So in stressful situations, they run and they stop eating and they stop drinking, and trying to protect them from the elements. So the wind, the rain, the sun, the snow is just going to help decrease the stress that we put on them when we bring them home. So you don't have to have a big fancy barn, as long as there's something that they can get out of the elements and stay dry and stay cool or stay warm. That's the most important thing. And then fencing.
Looks like Joseph has a question also.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
When is the best time to get your sheep?
So for your guys' fair is in July, right?
It's in June.
June. So usually for a June show, you usually want them between 8 to 10 months old. So that's 6 to 10 months old. Sometimes it doesn't matter. If you want a 6-month-old lamb, it's going to be a little bit lighter. If you want a 10-month-old lamb, it's going to be a little bit heavier. So anywhere from October to December, and maybe even January. January, you're getting a little late. But so October born lambs, November born lambs. So then you buy your animal about 60 days to 90 days after they're born. When is your tag-in date, Cheyenne? For sheep, I guess.
That's a good question. It is April 7th.
April 7th. So you guys have to have your animals before April 7th. So on April 7th, they have to be in your possession so that you can get a tag on them. So animals that are born in October, November, December, and even into January, you will wait 60 to 90 days after they're weaned and after they're done with their mom, and then you can buy them. So an animal that was born in October, you can usually buy in December. An animal that was born in November, you can usually get them in December or in January. So anytime right now, there's breeders. There's quite a few breeders in Vernal. There's quite a few breeders in Salt Lake and south of Salt Lake that have lambs that were born October, November, December, that are ready now or just about ready to go to fair homes. So you just kind of have to think about how big you want your animal. I think that's what really determines when you buy your animal or when they were born. So like I said, the older the animal, the bigger generally they're going to be. So if you want a smaller animal that's going to make weight, you guys have a 100-pound weight limit. Is that what the minimum is? I'd have to look at the rules, but I think it's 100 or 100. So you have to make sure you're going to at least hit 100 pounds. So you want one that's 6 months or older usually, so that you make sure you make that weight. You can see in this picture, if you look past this blue lamb, right at the kind of the tip of his nose, there's some paneling up there that's kind of little squares that are attached to these bars. That's kind of our fencing in our pens, and that's to keep animals in. So when we bring babies into our barn, they can fit. These panels were made for horses, and so our little lambs can squeeze between those panels. And so the fencing is kind of to help keep our animals in. And then we have lots of dogs, and there's even coyotes where we live. So it's also to help keep predators out. So to keep your animals safe, and make sure that nothing gets in with them. So you want to make sure that they have a safe, warm, dry, or cool area to live. Josie, did that answer your question about when to buy an animal or to look for an animal?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. The next thing we should think about when we talk about a budget is feed. There are all different kinds of feed. These are just 2 feeds that I looked up on the internet and found a picture of, but there are all different kinds of feed. There are all different kinds of quality of feed, and brands of feed. So the thing that I look for when we're feeding a feed is that, do my animals like it? Are they eating it? Because if they're not eating it, it's not doing me any good. And is the place that I buy it from going to be able to have it the whole time I have my animal? Because I do not want to have to switch feeds on my animal once I get it. Because as soon as you switch feeds, you can have problems with their digestive tract and diarrhea and them going off of feed, and then they lose weight. So that's what I usually ask our feed stores when we are gonna get a sheep, is that, do you get this frequently? How often do your shipments come in? Are you going to have bags all summer? And so usually with feed, we're looking at an 16 to 20% protein. It just depends kind of on what's available or what's your end game, I guess, if you're trying to put weight on an animal or you're trying to take weight off an animal. So there's different levels of protein that you can buy. That gets a little more complicated, and I'm happy to answer questions about that through email or phone call if you want to dive into nutrition. But I think the most important thing is if your animal's eating it and it's a show type feed. So there's a lot of feed out there for ewes or for older sheep just as a supplement, or sweet feeds, and those are not show feeds. Those are just a supplemental feed. So something you would feed an animal just to give them a little bit of extra energy. But a show feed is a complete feed. So that's all that they have to eat. They get all of their nutrients, all of their energy off of a show feed.
You up to where
Was that a question or was that an accident?
I think it was an accident.
So again, are they eating it? Is my feed store going to have it? And how long are we going to feed it? So how many bags of that feed are we going to need? And we'll talk about how we figure out show feed, or how we figure out the amount we feed here in just a minute. But these are all things that we look at when we look at cost and budget. I just threw in a couple quotes in my thing here. So never hope for it more than you work for it. So I think that's one of my common themes in this presentation, is that having an animal is a lot of work, and the more you work, the more it will pay off. So don't go into showing livestock thinking that it's easy, because it's not easy. It's a lot of work, and the harder you work, the more it'll pay off in the long run. So remember to work harder than you want it. Another thing we have to think about with our budget is veterinary care. So have our animals been vaccinated? Most of the time when we buy a show lamb, they've already been vaccinated from the breeder, but that's something that you're going to want to ask. Have they been vaccinated as a lamb? And most of the time, the answer to that is yes. If they haven't been, then that's something that you'll need to take care of. And then also deworming emergencies. We've had emergencies where a lamb has gone through a fence or got caught on something sharp and cut themselves. We've had to take them in and get stitches or staples. There's different diseases that they can come with. There's sore mouth, there's ringworm, there's lots of different things that can happen while you own your show lamb that you'll have to get a veterinarian to help you take care of. And that's all additional costs. So vaccinations, again, I don't think most of us have to do vaccinations unless we're vaccinating because our animal is sick, or we're giving some kind of medication because our animal is sick. Most of the time, our lambs have been vaccinated with a CDT vaccination before we get them. So if you raise your own animals, then obviously you're vaccinating them. If you're buying them from a breeder, that should be taken care of. But if you do have to give a vaccination, we give them anything that goes under the skin. We give in the off side shoulder. So in the kind of the armpit, actually, like in the skin, just under the armpit. The CDT vaccination that you give leaves a bump that almost never goes away. So we always want to make sure that's on the off show side, so that when you're showing your animal, there's not a big bump on their side. So that purple dot is kind of where we would give the vaccination. You can see in this picture, this guy's giving the vaccination right in the skin under the armpit. But he's doing it on show side. So we would actually do it on the other side if we were doing this vaccination, but it's in the right spot. So that's why I put the picture there. If you have to give something like an antibiotic or something like that, the veterinarian should be able to help you or show you where to give that. Usually we also give that in the shoulder, just above that purple dot, but in the muscle. So we always want to try to do it off sides, off show side, and somewhere where the judge or someone looking at our animal will not see it. Dewormer. So this goes into veterinary care as well. We want to deworm our animals. Does anybody know why we deworm our animals? Anybody? No. Okay, so we
You
deworm
want
our,
to feed the animal, not the worm.
exactly. We want to feed the animal, not the worm. So if an animal has a lot of worms in its intestines or in its stomach, those worms are taking all of the energy and all of the nutrients out of the animal's feed and using those to grow the worms instead of grow our animal. So if our animal looks skinny, it's losing hair, it's not growing, there's a really high possibility that we have worms or that our animal has worms. There's all kinds of different dewormers available on the market. I think that as of June 1, we will not be able to buy these anymore. We'll have to get them from a veterinarian. So if you plan on deworming your animal, I would tell you to stock up now, because otherwise you're going to have a prescription to do this. Right now, these dewormers are available at your feed store, but as of June 1, the law is changing and they will not be available just to go in and buy. You'll have to have a prescription. One of the things they talk about a lot with dewormers is resistance. So we're deworming animals so much that we're causing the worms to not be affected by the dewormers. So one thing that they're recommending that we do is take a fecal sample to our vet and have them see if we actually need to deworm. It's not very hard. Sometimes it's a little bit of a chore to do things like that, but at least the veterinarian could tell us if they have worms, what kind of worms they have, and usually recommend a dewormer for us to use. So I would say always check with your breeder or check with your veterinarian if you aren't sure on dewormers. One thing I want to talk about just for a minute when we talk about medications, and this is any kind of medication. So it's a vaccination, an antibiotic, steroid, anti-inflammatory, dewormer, anything that you give to your animal other than their feed. All of that will have a withdrawal period. A withdrawal period is the amount of time from the time you give the medication until the animal can be harvested for human use. So for us to eat, right? So we're raising market animals. We're raising animals to put into the food chain for people to eat. So every medication that we give our animal has a withdrawal period. So this was just one of the labels. All of the labels on any medication you ever give a livestock animal will have this same kind of label on it that tells you what the withdrawal period is. So you have to make sure that before you take your animal to the show, if you have to treat that animal, you better make sure you know what the withdrawal period time on the medication is. So for example, this dewormer says that it's a 6-day withdrawal period. So if you give this dewormer, you have to wait at least 6 days until that animal's harvested. So we just need to kind of be aware that we are raising food for people to eat. And we have to be responsible as shepherds, as livestock owners and people that raise livestock for human use, that we're not putting antibiotics or medications into our animal before they're slaughtered. So this withdrawal period is huge. And if you ever get drug tested and your animal comes back for any kinds of medications in their system, you can get kicked out of shows. So it's important to know, it's important to understand. And if you don't understand it, ask somebody. Your veterinarian is like the most important person. So if they can't answer you, then I'm sure we can find somebody that can. But most of the time, the medications will have a label on it. So we've talked about some of the pre-care that kind of goes into our animals, so we can think about what we need to do for them before we get them, or if something comes up. And now let's talk about selecting an animal. So when you go and you look at your baby animals, what are you looking for? How are you going to pick out the best one in your price range? And there's just some general recommendations that we can give you of what you can look for. It's kind of hard sometimes because the babies are usually a little crazy and they're running around the pen and there's a lot of them to choose from. But sometimes when you go into a pen and you have 10 lambs in there, you can start picking out your favorites. And then if we can catch our favorites and look at them more closely, sometimes we can make better decisions. So one of the very first things you want to look for is conformation. So is our lamb built right? Are his bones right? Is his structure right? Is his muscling right? Because that's what the judge is going to look for when you walk into the ring on show day. So do his legs from the side stand right under his shoulder? If you look in this top left corner, it kind of shows you the side view of the front legs. And so the shoulder, that first picture is a correct confirmation. So his shoulder and his legs come straight down off of his shoulder. And then you can see some of the deformities that we would rather not have: the calf need, weak pasterns, buck knees. Same with the rear view. Does that back leg come right off the hip straight down? We don't want to have a bow-legged animal, and we definitely don't want to have a cow-hocked animal, because that's all going to change the way the animal walks when they walk into the room. The front view is the same: straight legs right off the shoulders. We don't want their toes to turn out. We don't want their toes to turn in. We don't want their knees to touch. We want those to try and be as straight and wide fronted as you can get them. And then it talks a little about the side view legs on the rear as well. Same kind of thing. We want them straight off the hip. We don't want them cocked in. We don't want them overextended. And then we're going to look at muscling. So we're going to look at how wide our animal is. A rule of thumb that I was always taught is you want your animal to gradually get wider. So when you put your hand on their shoulders and you run it down their back, you want it to be the narrowest at the shoulder and then to get wider as it goes to the hip. So kind of like a triangle. So if you think about a triangle, you want their shoulders to be narrower than their hips. So you want their pins and their hips, which is kind of this line across the back of the lamb, to be the widest. When you look at a lamb from the side, it's kind of the same thing. We want that area under their armpit to be the narrowest part of the lamb, and we want that to gradually get bigger under the belly as we drop back to the flank. So kind of like this one doesn't have a very good triangle, but kind of like a triangle on the side profile too. So the narrowest between the chest floor and the shoulder, and the deepest between the rear flank and kind of the hip area. So just think about looking at a triangle when you look at your animals. Here are some pictures I pulled off Judging Pro, so you can kind of look at that side triangle view. So if you look at number four is pretty flat. So if you look at his top line and his bottom line, there's a pretty flat underline here on the bottom. And on the top, he looks good. He's good and flat, but he's really flat on the bottom too. If you look at number two looks a little bit more like a triangle. He's narrower in the chest, right behind that front arm. And as he goes back, he gradually gets a deeper flank. So that's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for this narrow chest floor up in the front, behind the front leg. And then it gets deeper as you get back to the back leg. Another quote: champions don't show up to get everything they want. They show up to get everything they have, or to give everything they have. So again, work hard and give it everything you've got, whether you win or lose. We're going to move into feeding real fast. So we pick our animal, we get it home, and then we have to feed it. So like I said before, we got to pick a feed and stick with it. Don't change feeds. That's probably one of the hardest things you can do on your lamb's digestive tract and to gain weight, is changing feeds. Unless they absolutely hate their feed and they're not eating it, try not to change feeds. Try to stick with one feed the entire time you have your animal. A show feed, again, a complete show feed, not a sweet feed or just a barley mix or a barley corn mix. That is not a complete show feed. So we want to go a complete show type grain feed. This next bullet point, the creep feed or the free feed, that's just what we do. That's just what we do. We creep feed or free feed our animals so they get as much grain. After a couple of days, we kind of wean them up to free choice feed. So you can ask the breeder what they've been feeding. If they've been feeding grain and they've been on grain for a while, you can move slowly over to your grain. If they've only ever been on hay, you want to move to grain gradually over about a week. So you give them a little bit for a couple of days, and then you increase that amount until you get to the amount of grain that you want to feed. If you were just to take an animal from hay and put a bunch of grain in front of them, you could cause acidosis, or you can make them really sick, and then it's really hard to get them over that. So make sure you ask your breeder what they've been on. If they've been on grain, great, you can make the switch. If they haven't been on grain, gradually make that switch over a couple of days. So When we have baby lambs, we keep them on free choice feed until they're about 70 to 80 pounds. So we want those lambs to get full and thick and grow as big as they can until they're about 80 pounds. Once they're about 70 to 80 pounds, we start weighing their feed. So this can get really complicated. Again, it's math and it's work and it's hard, but it makes a huge difference when you're trying to put weight on your lamb. So you know when your end game is, you know how much weight you need to gain, and you can kind of judge how much you need to feed your lamb based off of what they weigh when you get it and what you want your end goal to be when you walk into the show ring. So we always want our end goal to be between 135 and 150 pounds on our sheep. That's what we consider a show weight, a finished show weight. So between 70 to 80 pounds when we take them off the creep feed up to about 100 to 110 pounds, we're feeding 3.5% of their body weight. So we're trying to get them to gain. We want them to gain and want them to get muscly and want them to look full and big for our show. So we kind of feed until we get that look that we want, that full look. We don't want them fat, but we want them full. So we feed, if you want to increase their body weight, you have to feed a 3.5 to 4% of their body weight feed. So say you have a 100-pound lamb, that's feeding 3.5 pounds to 4 pounds of feed a day. And then we split that into 2 feedings. So it's 2 pounds in the morning and 2 pounds at night if you're feeding 4%. Like I said, this gets a little complicated with the math, but I'm happy to help. I'm happy to talk about it if you have questions. Weighing your animal, if you can weigh your animal, we have scales at our fairgrounds, and a lot of the leaders and breeders that we know in the area have scales, and I'm sure it's the same in your area. There's probably scales available to you if you ask, but you have to ask. So weigh your animal as often as you can. We weigh our animals weekly just to see how we change feed, because we're changing feed and looking at feed that frequently to make sure we're getting our animal to exactly where we want it. Again, you're going to take that feed that we decide that you calculate, and you're going to split it into a twice-a-day feeding. You're going to try to feed in the morning, and you're going to try to feed your grain at night. And again, we weigh everything. So everything's being weighed, it's being split up, and every animal gets a different amount of feed in our barn. If you have animals that are in the same pen, you can see in this picture, there's a fence between these, but I think there was 3 or 4 animals in this pen with this lamb. So every animal gets caught and they get tied to the fence in front of their feeder until they're done eating their feed. And then we take the feeders away and we let the lambs go. So we know exactly how much each lamb is getting and how much they're eating. On top of feeding grain, we also have to feed a little bit of hay because they're a ruminant animal. So to keep their rumen moving and them digesting the hay or digesting the grain, we have to feed them a coarse or rough feed. So that's where we feed a handful. Most of the time the breeders will tell you just to feed a handful of hay just to keep their rumen working and healthy. So again, I talked about feeding examples. If we have a 100-pound lamb and we're trying to gain weight, how much food would we feed per day? We talked about a 3.5 to 4% of their body weight. So 3.5% of their body weight is 3.5 pounds on a 100-pound animal. 4% of their body weight is 4 pounds on a 100-pound animal. And then we would split that into 2 feedings. So if we were feeding 3.5 pounds of feed and we split that into a morning feed and an evening feed, we're feeding 1 3/4 pounds of feed per day. If we have 4% of our body weight of a 100-pound lamb, that's 4 pounds of feed. We split that into 2 feedings. That's 2 pounds twice a day. If you have a big 150-pound lamb and you don't want it to gain any more weight, you want it to keep right where it's at. So you're getting close to fair day and you're thinking 150 pounds or 140 pounds is good and you want to maintain it. Maintenance is 3% of their body weight. So 3% of a 150-pound lamb is 4.5 pounds of feed a day. And then you split that into 2 feedings and you're feeding 2 1/4 pounds of feed twice a day to maintain. Sometimes they need a little less than 3%. If you feel like they're gaining weight and they're still getting fat, you can decrease that a little bit, but usually the magic number is right around 3% of their body weight to maintain. we'll talk about training. We'll kind of go through this a little quick because everybody does it a little different. So I had a video of a walker on here for halter breaking, but I couldn't get it to upload. So this is how we halter break our animals. Ryder goes out into our barn every day and he catches his lambs and he cleans their pens and he changes their water. And while he's in their pen, they are hanging. So there's a chain that's attached to the roof of our barn, and they stand, we hook their halter to this chain and they learn how to stand there. So for the first couple of days, sometimes they fall over. And so we leave it a little longer and you just kind of get them up and stand them back up. We don't ever leave our lambs unattended. We are always with them so they don't do something crazy. But this is how we halter break our animals. This is how we get them used to being tied. This is how we get them used to being handled and just to be calm on a halter. When he's done cleaning their pen and he's done watering, he walks up to them and he touches them. He touches their face, he touches their back, he touches their legs, he moves them around. He does everything he would do when he's training them to kind of be a show lamb when they're tied to this chain, because they can't go anywhere. They can go in a little circle, but they can't really run away from him. I've seen people halter break lambs on a walker. So you hook them to the walker and you turn the walker on and you teach them how to lead that way. Another really successful way we've had to halter break animals is to take one that's already trained and let a baby follow it. So you have somebody walk an animal. If you have an animal that's trained or does a little better on a halter and you have a crazy one or a baby, follow the trained one. So once we have them halter broke, we have to teach them how to brace, because bracing is important because it shows off their muscle. And that's what the judge wants us to do when we are in the ring, is they want us to brace them. So here's a little video of a way that Kurt, my husband, teaches our babies how to brace. Is he picks them up by the chest until they're pushing with their back legs. He fixes their back legs and then he slowly sets them down. And as soon as they stop bracing, he picks their chest back up again. He waits till they're pushing with those back legs, fixing their back legs. So sometimes it takes a minute. But as soon as that lamb starts to push, he's going to slowly set it down. And you saw as soon as its front feet touched the ground, it stopped bracing. So he's just going to keep doing that over and over and over again. Lift it by the front chest. So if you lift it by the chest rather than the neck, it's going to automatically push into you. So we lift it by the chest, we get it pushing, and we slowly lower it down till its front feet are touching the ground. And then as soon as its front feet are touching the ground, it's going to stop bracing. Eventually it will keep bracing. So you just have to keep working on it. By the end of this video, this lamb is bracing and holding it for a couple of seconds. Another way that people train their lambs that I've seen is by a bracing box. So this is some kind of box or some kind of, we use the stand sometimes, put them on the stand, and Ryder climbs up on the stand because it's on a little bit of an incline and he pushes them backwards and they don't want to fall off the stand. And so they learn to push forward. So if we have a lamb that's really not bracing, we put them on some kind of incline and we push backwards and they're going to want to push into you. So those are a couple of different ways that we teach our lambs how to brace. Here's a couple of videos on exercise. So once our animal gets to 150 or 110, not 150, 100, 110 pounds, we start exercising. This is just to keep our animals in shape, to build muscle so they don't get too fat. And I've always had it explained to me like a marathon runner versus a sprinter. So marathon runners are usually skinny and they don't have a ton of muscle definition. A sprinter is going to be a little bit thicker and their muscles are going to be a lot bigger. So they're only going a short distance, very quick speed for a short distance. So we want our lambs to look like sprinters. We want them to have big muscles and be kind of thick and really muscly. So we want them to sprint. We don't want them to run long distances. So Ryder takes his animals out into the field and we have a lamb tied up in the barn over here. And so they run as fast as they can. Sometimes the dogs help chase them, but they run as fast as they can back to the barn, a short distance, and he does that 2 or 3 times. Another way over in this other video is he takes them out in the arena with the dogs, and once they're pretty trained to follow him and like him, he runs and they chase him, and the dogs chase them, and it's all kinds of great entertainment. So a couple of ways that we exercise. We also have a treadmill. So this is getting, again, like tips and tricks that we do that not everybody else has to do. But we also have a treadmill. So our animals are treadmilled. They walk forward and they walk backwards a couple of times a week for 2 or 3 minutes. So this just helps build muscle, helps build definition. We don't put them on the treadmill to run them till they're exhausted. We put them on the treadmill to build muscle, just like if you were lifting weights or doing something, walking stairs, right? So this is kind of just like walking stairs. It's building these back muscles, it's building the shoulder muscles, it's building the butt muscles. But again, this is just extra. So just some of the things we do. Fitting. So we have our animal, we've fed it, we've trained it, we've braced it, we've halter broke it, it knows how to walk, it knows how to lead, it knows how to brace, we're exercising it, and then we're going to show it. So what do we have to do to get it ready for show day? So these are just some of the products that we use to get it ready for show day. We have a stand, something that the animal can safely stand on, that we hold it, and then clippers and a blower. So we're going to wash our animal. We use this Joy, this Ultra Lemon Scent Joy, to wash our animal for the very first time. When you're washing your animal for the very first time, they have a lot of oil in their wool. So if you were just to grab your animal, throw it on the stand and use your clippers to clip it while it was dirty, you're going to gunk up your clippers and dull your clipper blades really fast. So we use this Joy Ultra Lemon dish soap to try and break down the oil so that when we clip them, it doesn't dull our clipper blades. Once our animal is clipped, we only use this milk and honey. So this milk and honey is super soft on their skin and it's not going to dry their skin out. So we want our animal to have a really nice coat, have a really nice skin, and feel nice and silky when we show them. And so once they're clipped and they're bald, we only use the milk and honey. If it takes 2 or 3 weeks and you showed at a jackpot and you have a couple weeks until you're fair and you have to trim them again, we would use the Joy soap again to get the oil out of their wool before we trim them. And then once our animal is trimmed, we always use some kind of conditioner. So that's just to keep their hide moist, to keep it just like you would put lotion on your hands. We don't want them to feel dry. We don't want them to feel wrinkly. So we try to keep condition on them. And then there's a couple things that you probably have seen around at shows is a blanket. A blanket helps keep them clean. It helps keep their hide conditioned. And so we put the conditioning cream on them. We put a blanket on them. It helps keep them clean for show day, clean in their pen, so you don't have to wash them so many times. And then if you're big into leg wool, you're trying to go those legs as big and fluffy as you can. We wash and dry legs in the summertime every other day. So every other day, riders out there washing with a soap and blow drying them, and then we keep our leg wrapped so that they can't chew out their leg wool. Again, those are a little bit of extra things that not everybody has to do. So fitting, again, we wash them, we trim them, we get them ready for show day. So you're trimming the body, you're leaving the leg wool, you're trimming the head, you basically trim everywhere but their legs. And if you have never trimmed an animal, reach out to somebody that's done it or that knows what they're doing, and they can help you kind of get them exactly right. Success doesn't come from what you do occasionally, it comes from what you do consistently. So if you've taken anything away so far, it's that this takes a lot of work, and it's not just a one-time thing, it's a whole summer activity, it's a daily chore, it's a daily job. Feeding our animals, weighing our animals, walking our animals, bracing our animals, getting legs ready. All of this should be done. You should be touching your animal every day. The more you touch your animal, the more broke your animal is going to be, and the better you're going to get along when it comes time to show. So we've broke our animal, we've trimmed our animal. Now it's getting ready for show day, and we need to think about showmanship. So when you go to the fair, you're judged on 2 things. You're judged on the market class, which is your animal. So the judge walks in and he looks at your animal and he judges your animal based off of everybody else's animals. So conformation, structure, muscle, all of those things he's looking at when he's looking at your animal. And then usually the next day there's a showmanship. Sometimes it's showmanship first, but showmanship is you. You are being judged. Not every kid can have a market grand champion animal. But I think every kid can be a champion showman, because all it takes to be a champion showman is effort and time and will to want to win. There are lots of camps all over the United States. You guys actually have one right there in Vernal that's a super awesome showmanship camp. And I would highly recommend that if you're serious about being a showman, you look into going to a camp, or you talk to somebody in your area that's won showmanship and you have them ask them if they can work with you and teach you things. But with showmanship, it's about ring presence. How do you look when you walk into that ring? You should be looking at the judge before you ever even step foot in that ring. You should know where the judge is. You should know what class you're in. And you should know the pattern that the animals walk in when they walk in the ring. So you should have watched the class before you to know exactly how those animals walk in the ring. So when it's your turn, you know exactly what you need to do. Dress. You want to dress like you're going to a job interview. You want to be clean cut. You want to have your hair done. You want to look nice. You want to, if your shoes or your pants or your shirt got all dirty, change them. Make sure when showmanship comes around, you look clean and as nice as if you're going to church or going to a job interview. And eye contact. Never, if the judge is looking at you, you are looking at the judge. That's the biggest thing I think I can tell kids, is that eye contact is huge. You always want to have eye contact with the judge. If he's looking away, you can hurry and look at your animal and make sure your animal is doing what it needs to be doing. Otherwise, you are staring holes through that judge. Never take your eyes off of him. Always know where the judge is, or her. Always know where they're at, and always make sure they know that you're looking at them. I think that's one of the biggest things kids get pulled for, is eye contact. So have good eye contact. You can see Ryder here. He's got the death glare. That kid stares holes through the judge. So I'm not saying you have to be that intense, but he's always got his eyes on the judge. And then animal presentation. So the way that your animal looks, that it's clean, that it's sheared right, that everything you've done to get the animal up to that point, he looks his best when he walks in the ring that day as well. So there's a couple things with showmanship. I just put up a couple pictures that I found real quick. This is the same animal, but one thing Ryder is doing in the first picture is wrong, and he's fixed it in the second picture. Can anybody tell me what he's done wrong? What do you not like about the first picture that he's kind of fixed in the second picture? So it's more along the lines of animal presentation. His hands are a little different in the first picture too, but what, can anyone tell me what the animal's doing wrong in the first picture? Anybody? So when we're bracing, we want that animal to be a little bit stretched out, right? We want its back to be as flat as we can get it. We want its neck to be at 90 degrees, like in the second picture. We want its front legs to be right underneath it and its back legs to be a little bit behind it. So you can see in this first picture, he's got this animal way too tucked up. So you can see its back legs are pretty much right underneath it. His neck is a little bit too pushed back. His hands are all over the place. So these are just two examples of showmanship. It's the exact same animal on a different day. So in one picture, he's just taking a backdrop picture, so he's not as serious about it. And the other picture, he's in the ring showing for showmanship. But the same animal, same kid, 2 different days, 2 different situations, and the animal looks totally different. So being consistent. Consistency is huge in showmanship, and showing your animal. So Ryder has mirrors in his barn, so he can look and see what he's doing all the time, so that we don't always have to get after him. He stands in front of those mirrors and he sets his animal up over and over and over and over and over again. So when you get into the ring, your animal already knows what you're expecting of it. The more you can set it up, the more you can work with it, the more you can move its legs and try to get it positioned just right, the easier your time will be when you hit that ring. Showmanship is the art of displaying your animal's best asset on the days it decides to forget everything you've worked on, and you got to keep on smiling. So this happens all the time. The only exhibitor you should try to be better than is the exhibitor you were yesterday. And winning doesn't happen in the show ring, it happens in the barn. Again, we've talked about a lot today. It's a lot of information, but I hope that the one thing you got out of it was consistency and working with that animal and touching that animal and being with that animal from the minute you bring it home. The more time you spend with it, the more questions you ask, the more information you can get about feeding, about exercising, about showmanship, the better your chances are going to be on show day. So that is all I have. Are there any questions?